Inicio a la sexta sesión denominada Cooking for Life, Políticas públicas hacia combustibles limpios. Un importante análisis sobre las políticas públicas en otros países para reemplazar el uso de leña, carbón y combustibles líquidos por GLP y las propuestas sobre cómo hacerlo en Colombia. Para ello nos acompaña como conferencista el doctor Kirk Smith, profesor e investigador de la Universidad de California, Berkeley, de Estados Unidos. Le damos la palabra al doctor Smith. Welcome to Colombia.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this meeting. It's very exciting to see the progress that Colombia has made. Wasn't so long, not too many decades ago, when Colombia was in serious trouble, and it's really great to see it coming along so well. So many smart people looking at difficult problems and thinking of good solutions. Now, I'm going to take a look at this problem of LPG from the health side. I'm actually a health scientist. I look at the health effects of air pollution on populations. And you may not quite recognize it, but the pollution inside village houses that are burning wood for cooking and space heating some of the highest air pollution levels in the world. And I'm going to tell you a bit about what's happening on the health side in organizing and thinking about this problem. Now, let's see. So, but first I'm going to say you're representatives, most of you, of the oil and gas industry. And you must say, you sometimes must feel a little beleaguered, a little bit beat upon, because you get blamed for everything. You get blamed for offshore oil platform explosions, for pipeline spills, for tanker collisions, for fracking, impacts of fracking, which has resulted in so much LPG in the world, diesel exhaust, and urban air pollution, and of course climate change. So I recognize that you understand some of the subtleties behind this, but this is often the way the public looks at the oil industry. In fact, I just went on the web, and there's a new book out called Fracking Hell, about the terrible impacts of fracking. Here's a thing showing the oil industry like a snake crushing the planet. And this is the best one. It's the oil industry as a Death Star, destroying the planet Earth. So, I mean, that's part of your life as being in the oil industry, that it doesn't have the greatest image in many parts of our society. But actually, you should push back. You should argue, wait a minute. We have the fuel that can save millions of lives around the world. And that's what we're talking about here is LPG. This is the estimated so-called burden of disease from household air pollution. Household air pollution is what we call the smoke that comes from cooking fires. That's at the bottom, the household air pollution. The top line is the total number of deaths from outdoor air pollution, ambient air pollution. And the bottom, I know it's hard to read, but it's about 2.5 million deaths from outdoor air pollution and about 1,700 deaths from household air pollution around the world. Now, the way these studies are done, and I've done many of them myself, is you compare the household air pollution when you're burning wood with burning LPG. LPG is usually the alternative. This is actually, that lower line is actually from the lack of LPG, if you like, because that's what we're usually measuring as the clean fuel. So if you were to put in LPG here, you get rid of all the bottom line, and actually you get rid of some of the top line too, because household fuels are responsible for 15-20% of all outdoor air pollution in the country, in the world as well. In India, where I work, 30% of ambient air pollution comes from households. So solving the household pollution problem also helps with the ambient pollution problem. So that is millions of lives a year potentially saved by providing clean household fuels such as LPG. So what kinds of diseases? Now, this is not a health lecture, so I'm not going to go through the evidence base, but we have good evidence on all these diseases. Chronic lung disease, heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, diabetes, pneumonia in children, and low birth weight in babies whose mothers were exposed during pregnancy. We have excellent data on all of these things. All of these are accepted as part of the burden of disease from household air pollution. Now, you might think, of what else do we see these diseases for? Well, these are exactly the same diseases due to tobacco smoke. What is tobacco smoke? Tobacco smoke is burning biomass. Now, you can hardly do worse than sticking the burning biomass in your mouth. The woman in the village house doesn't stick the stove in her mouth, but there's a lot of pollution in a village house. Typical village house, a cooking stove produces about 300 cigarettes an hour worth of smoke in the surroundings of the fire. Now, again, the woman is not sticking it in her mouth, but it's a very polluted situation that exposes her, exposes her young children, and exposes other members of the family. So, in fact, a lot of this evidence has come in fairly recent years and has come from Latin America. This is actually the first randomized control trial. It's the gold standard in the health field. It was actually done by a team where I was the head of the team, and it was done in Guatemala, not so far from here. It was published in a major medical journal, The Lancet, 8 years ago. Since then, we've have a much more evidence from Latin America, Africa, and Asia about the health effects of this household air pollution. So, but if you're going to claim the benefits of LPG for reducing household air pollution, seems to me you need to support the national and international efforts to make LPG universally available to the poor. Because if it's just the middle class buying LPG, when they can afford it, and the poor out there in the rural areas still using wood, it's not helping with this burden of disease. The burden of disease is not here in Bogota, it's out in the rural areas. You have to find ways to expand the use of LPG to the poorest in the world. So this is this development of understanding about the health effects of air pollution has led to a major innovation or decision that's coming up next month by PAHO. PAHO is the Pan American Health Organization. It's the regional grouping of the World Health Organization that covers North and South America. All of the New World is under PAHO. PAHO's headquarters are in Washington, D.C., but it has offices all throughout Latin America. So PAHO likes to think of itself as a pioneer among all the regional offices of WHO. It was the first region to eradicate smallpox in 1971. First region to eliminate polio in 1994. Rubella, endemic measles. All were firsts in the PAHO region, something to be proud of. So we've been making the argument that ought to be the first region to eradicate a risk factor. These are specific diseases. What about a risk factor? Cigarette smoking, ambient air pollution, dirty water, these are risk factors. Why not why not be the first region to get rid of household air pollution? And in fact, they are moving in that direction now, as I'll show you. So we're targeting a risk factor, not a disease. In fact, it would be the first risk factor ever to be targeted after tobacco, of course. So we published a paper in the British Medical Journal just last March proposing that the PAHO, your region, be the first region in the world to get rid of household air pollution, as it was the first region in the world to get rid of smallpox. PAHO is, through its processes, it had an executive committee meeting earlier this year in June, and they decided to propose this to their assembly, which is meeting next month. And this is what they're proposing, and this is going to be presented late September at their annual meeting, that this would be one of their targets. Eliminating polluting biomass cooking fuels as a public health problem. And points out the 5 countries in the region that have a lot of use are the poorer countries in the region: Haiti, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Paraguay. Other parts of the region, including Colombia, have lower usage today. It's about 10% of the total population in the region, and it's the whole region, including North America, now uses solid fuels. Seems like a potentially doable action item. And they didn't say 100%, but 5%. So the goal would be that every country in the region would agree to have less than 5% of its population still using solid fuels by 2030. Now this would be quite a step forward internationally. If you look at the regional use of biomass today, I'm sorry, these are all abbreviations of the countries, but basically the countries that use quite a bit now are Nicaragua, Guatemala, Honduras, Peru, Paraguay, and Bolivia, and the poorer countries in the region. I'm going to skip that. So how do we compare tobacco with household air pollution? Tobacco, as you all know, is a major risk factor around the world. Kills perhaps 8 million people around the world every year. Household air pollution causes more ill health than smoking in the poorer countries of the region. Globally, household air pollution causes far more ill health than secondhand tobacco smoke. Being smoke-free, then, we all want smoke-free environments. We're used to having no smoking in restaurants and schools and public places now. You have to start acting against the tobacco epidemic. But actually, we have the problem of a lot of smoke coming from cooking fires for much of our population too. That is just as bad as the tobacco smoke. So in PAHO, countries that have more impact on from household air pollution than tobacco, or Guatemala and Haiti. Countries that have about the same impact of household air pollution and tobacco, or other poor countries. And there are parts of Mexico and Brazil and undoubtedly other countries as well where there are high use of solid fuels for cooking that also have higher impacts than from smoking. So what we need is basically to change the concept of subsidy to social investment. Now, as a health scientist, we don't talk about subsidies. We want to vaccinate everybody against infectious diseases. We don't call that a subsidy. We call that a social investment. We need to have an investment in a healthy society. So we give vaccinations to the poor. It's not a subsidy. It's a social investment. Now, economists might say, well, wait a minute, it's taxpayer money. It's a subsidy. People aren't paying for it for themselves. But we don't look at it that way. These are serious social investments, just as investing in schools. That's a subsidy. It's taxpayer pays for it, but it's a social investment because we all have a stake in highly educated children. So subsidy is a tool, but I prefer to think of it as social investments. As we have a need to provide a social investment to help people move away from the unhealthy, polluting use of solid fuels, particularly wood, for cooking. So actually, in the Latin American region, there's been a lot of experience over the decades of subsidies coming in and off and performing them in different ways. There's quite a bit of experience, and there's ongoing experience here in Colombia today about how it works and how it doesn't work. That needs to be applied to this problem. India is actually doing a massive LPG program that I'll talk about in a minute. And it has an income per capita about like Bolivia, which is the 5th poorest in the PAHO region. If India can do this massive program with the level of poverty of Bolivia, it doesn't seem like too much to ask the whole region to meet the new PAHO guidelines of no more than 5% in every country. On the other hand, poor countries in the region, which would not be Colombia, but poor countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua may need some international help to actually reach these goals. That's the point of doing this on the regional scale, is that countries can reach across national borders to help each other. So I guess the question is, will this new PAHO target, which I think will be signed late next month, will actually this help in the efforts to reduce biomass fuel use in rural Colombia and other parts of Latin America? Now, I want to talk about India. I was asked to talk about India. India has this massive LPG program, 80 million households in 4 years. That's less than 4 years, 500 million people. These are poor households. That's in addition to the growth in the middle class. This is just households that would not be engaged if this program hasn't started. So how was it done, briefly? Well, first thing to do is to stop selling the fuel and moving the subsidies through the sellers, the distributors, as they're called in India. They engage electronic bank accounts. All financial activity occurs in electronic bank accounts now. Secondly, the subsidies that had been given for decades in India were, everybody got them. Middle class got them. Rich people got it. Doctors got it. The prime minister got them. A waste to provide subsidies to people who don't need them. But the problem with subsidies, one of the problems, is they are very hard to get rid of. People get to like them. They don't want to give up the money. They don't want to give money back to the government. Even the rich and the middle class who don't need them don't want to give the money back. So Indians did something very clever. They said instead of taking the subsidy away from the middle class, they asked they asked the middle class for them back. And I'll explain how that worked. And then finally, the large program that they're finishing up next month. So all LPG is now sold at international price. No subsidy, no cheaper fuel is available on the market because the subsidies go directly into the electronic bank accounts, not only of the customer, but only the woman customer. Only women qualify to receive the subsidy. And when you buy a refill, you get the subsidy that pays for the next refill. It instantly won in the Guinness Book of Records as the largest bank transfer in human history when they started transferring the money by bank transfer in India. Eliminated millions of wasted ghost connections in that process. So I'm running out of time here, they tell me. As I say, it's very difficult to take subsidies away, so they ask for them. Middle class asked to give up their LPG subsidies, not taken away. Health was the message: make a poor woman's kitchen clean. They appealed to the humanitarian, mainly the urban people who had the subsidy, they didn't need it, and they recognized if they give up their subsidy, it could be made available to a poor person. Extensive social marketing, starting from the prime minister on down, billions of SMS messages, all sorts of activities promoting this Give It Up campaign. And of course, the fancy websites, a gift of good health to others and a cleaner environment for yourself. The most famous actor in India, most well-paid actor, had a message for this on the website. But the most brilliant thing they did is that when you gave up your subsidy, your name, say, second name there, J. Chowdhury on the left, he gave up his subsidy. There's the name of the poor person on the right who got the subsidy. So you weren't giving the money back to the government. Nobody wants to give the money back to the government. They're giving it to some good cause in the name of that poor person on the right. And of course, the media, the newspapers immediately ran out in rural areas to see if those people existed, and they did, fortunately. So people believed that their subsidy was going to something that the country needed, not going back to the government. So in this way, the Indian government got 20 million households to give up their subsidies. That's $1 billion a year of saved subsidies that could be applied to their new programs there. By 2016, however, they realized that they needed to go faster. They needed to have more money if they were going to get more people signed up. And so Modi gave a speech. We have decided to embark upon a massive mission to provide LPG connections in the name of women members of poor households. This measure will empower women and protect their health. It will reduce drudgery, and the time spent on cooking will also provide employment for rural youth. And they started this massive program, the so-called Ujjwala program. They added 10,000 distributors to the existing 18,500, a massive increase in the infrastructure involved in selling LPG all over the country. They provided no-fault insurance because people are worried about, when they first started, they're worried about the risk of LPG. There's a national toll-free number to call. They provided funds for paying for the upfront costs of being connected, the deposit on the cylinder and the stove. Massive national database was created. Every customer is in this database. You can see how many refills they're getting. And they developed a 5-kilogram cylinder so the very poor didn't have to pay for, Indian standard size is 14 kilograms, didn't have to pay as much when purchasing the fuel. And everything was only to women's bank accounts. These are the kinds of ads they have: clean fuel, better life, every woman will get her due respect and dignity. A lot of the focus was on the status of women. Justified, if you will, because only women got the subsidy, but as part of the promotion campaign, that this was a promotion for India's poor women. Shows that one of the benefits, it might be health, but it also provides time for more family, for more health care and for education of the women and so forth. Here is also health was a serious part of the message. Burning eyes, an old story now if you take on LPG. There are lots and lots of ads like this. Success due to efficient, the private oil companies are private, but they are also owned by the government, so they work on these social programs. Top to bottom commitment from Modi on down, massive use of social marketing, intensive use of electronic media, the electronic bank accounts, mobile phones, electronic ID cards, appeal to the middle class to give up subsidies, pays for the entire new program, politically popular with only minor complaints, aspirational transition. No house actually refuses LPG usually, but normally they couldn't have afforded it, now they can. Final targets, 80 million households connected, plus 40 million households to the normal channels. 95% of the country is now covered. Started at 60% in 2015 is a remarkable change in a fairly short period of time. And all of this is, they say, is going to happen by September 15th in a few weeks. But now they're thinking about Ujjwala too. What do we do next? Extend the final 5%. It's still tens of millions of households in a big country like India. They're more difficult, more remote, more poor, more disenfranchised communities, harder to reach. Usage needs to be enhanced because many Ujjwala customers don't use LPG that much. They may use it half the time, a quarter of the time. So they have to enhance usage, designing a whole series of programs to enhance usage. And extinguish. What do I mean by extinguish more subsidies out of the middle class? There's a huge potential asset, that middle class subsidy. We always thought of them as a kind of a drag, a kind of embarrassment, that a subsidy to the middle class. Now, Indians have shown that it's an asset if you can get to it. If you can extract more, if you can get more than 20 million who've given it up already, you get another 80 million to give up, you can actually have plenty of funds to support the extra subsidy needed for the very poorest and actually save the taxpayer money. So barriers to usage information, big effort on providing information to the public about the health impacts of biomass use, reliability, make sure that you get a good supply, a regular supply of the fuel, and they're actually going to provide everybody a second cylinder. If you have a second cylinder, you run out of LPG Saturday night, you don't have to worry about it coming soon. You can wait a week or two as you have a second cylinder on hand. And the cost issues, there are the upfront cost issues, which the program itself addresses. And then the fuel cost issues, studies show that we need to increase the social investment in the the poorest groups in the country. So we're considering some other linkages, linking it to the new universal health insurance scheme. You get a discount on your health insurance if you use LPG, which is, makes sense in terms of the health impacts. That's called Modi Care in India. Linked to the prenatal care system. Give free LPG is a way of introducing pregnant women to the fuel during a time of behavior change, and since pregnancies are limited in time, it's not a permanent subsidy. And finally, link it to the National Rural Employment Scheme, where people get a guaranteed employment, where if they sign up for LPG, they would get extra days on their employment scheme. So that's a very quick run through on the Indian program, and I'm glad to take any questions. My publications and presentations can be reached by Googling my name. Thank you very much.